And so I just hope that you're ready when the nukes come and are looming and we get the emergency alert on our phone and we go to huddle in the basement and await sweet oblivion. I hope you're ready to make sure you still mask up and social distance.
Oh my God.
So I covered this on Base Politics, and actually I don't think many other people did. So some other places like Reason have started citing that reporting and aggregating it. So that's very complimentary to toot my own horn a little. But the federal government, so Putin just did something kind of scary, but probably symbolic. He just put additional nuclear forces on special combat readiness, which A, it's not really sure what that means, and B, I think it's just saber rattling. It's not indicative of any imminent action. I mean, he is. I've described Putin this way from talking to some foreign policy experts and friends. He is rational but not reasonable. His goals and his aims are bad and not, acceptable or good things. He wants to conquer large parts of the world, restore Russian glory. He doesn't care about killing people. But he is a rational actor in that he logically makes decisions that advance his goals, as opposed to someone like Kim Jong-un in North Korea, who's just totally lost their mind. Well, Putin doesn't want to see, he wants to restore the Soviet empire, not have Russia nuked into pieces. So he is not going to launch a nuclear attack on the U.S. intentionally, even though he's saber-rattling right now and putting his systems on high alert and other things. But what cracked me up was that people were circulating materials online from ready.gov, which is a FEMA project here in the U.S., basically like a website giving people materials about how to prepare, like those cringy pamphlets, except this one is what to do if you get nuked. And it's just hilarious because the honest truth is you might not, what you do one way or another is probably not going to matter if you're in the red zone. In the yellow zone, yes, it will. So some of this advice is good advice, but it contains a bunch of stuff on this website in the nuke portion about making sure to mask and social distance while hiding from pending oblivion or radioactive fallout.
I'm sorry, it is hilarious though. Like, I mean, there's one tiny bit of this that's valid, which is that if you're in the fallout zone, you do want to stay inside and you do probably want to wear a mask because I think, from my understanding, you could theoretically survive it and it would dissipate over time if you were able to stay inside.
But the mask inclusion is for COVID.
But it's for COVID, right? That's what I was going to say. Like, it's not because of that. This is because they're worried about you catching COVID while you're trying to escape nuclear fallout. Like, the fact that my tax dollars went to create this pamphlet, the fact that this is what our government wants us to be concerned about if we get nuked, by the way, because of their dumbass foreign policy that has probably been propping up Ukraine and creating a proxy state and antagonizing Russia for years. Like, as best I understand, that's kind of what's been happening. So, like, let's be really clear. You've had a terrible foreign policy for many, many years, and you constantly get us earned blowback and get us attacked. And the entire thing is so circular, and it's just such a great picture in a pamphlet of how terrible our government is, constantly creating these stupid threats we have to live with that disrupt our society, disrupt our economy, and then giving us the worst possible advice for doing so. Like, just the cherry on top is that they're never going to give us correct advice for how to actually navigate these things. What a mess.
No, and let's actually read some of this advice because it is hilarious. So here's one passage from the website. Get inside the nearest building to avoid radiation. Brick or concrete are best. Go to the basement or middle of the building. Stay away from the outer walls and roof. Okay, yeah, fair enough. That's decent advice. Now here's the funny part. Try to maintain a distance of at least 6 feet between yourself and people who are not a part of your household. If possible, wear a mask if you're sheltering with people who are not a part of your household. So that's how you know it's not about radiation or anything, because it says, otherwise it would just be wear a mask. But because it's only if you're from people from a different household, it's clearly a COVID thing. In fact, they even say this as much in another excerpt where they go, stay inside for 24 hours unless local authorities provide other instructions. Okay. Continue to practice social distancing by wearing a mask and keeping a distance of at least 6 feet between yourself and people who are not part of your household. I honestly, I thought this was the Babylon Bee, a parody website, right? Because it's like the perfect parody. But apparently, federal bureaucrats really think that Americans hiding from a nuclear explosion are going to be concerned with masking and social distancing. How out of touch can you possibly be?
Also, I don't even the part where it says if they're not a part of your household, like you can't catch COVID from people who are part of your household. You absolutely can. In fact, didn't you do a piece on this at FEMA a while back that showed like a shockingly high number of people actually that got COVID got it from somebody in their household? Yeah, it spread at home. So like the fact that they still haven't even updated their COVID practices and this is what they're putting out. This is hilarious to me. I read one of the things you wrote in your article was something about they wanted you to call 911. You were like, who wants to explain to FEMA that 911 is probably not going to be able to answer if there's a nuclear bomb? Like, it's probably going to shut down.
Yeah, we have that quote too. It says, if you are experiencing a medical emergency, call 911 and let the operator know if you have or think you might have COVID-19. If you can, put on a mask before help arrives.
Stop.
There's so many things wrong with this that, like, think about it. If nukes are coming in, do you think calling 911, the line's going to be jammed, the people who work at 911 are going to be running home to their families, and also, what can 911 do to help?
Also, wouldn't a nuclear bomb knock out communications?
Well, like, this would be before it hits, they're saying, I guess. Or afterwards.
Okay. I'm not good at tech, but I'm pretty sure you can't use the phone after a nuclear bomb.
Yeah, I guess it depends where you are in relation to the bomb.
But yeah, what is 911 going to do for you?
That's the real question. And if by, hey, I hope 911 could help. I don't see how, but say that they could and that they were available. You think I'm gonna freaking care about wearing a mask or if I have COVID? I mean, we just got nuked? Like, I just want to know. Find me the federal bureaucrat that wrote this, decided it was a good idea. Find me their boss or multiple people that read this over and approved it. Because, FEMA doesn't just post stuff like willy-nilly. I'm sure it goes through a whole process with like multiple layers of bureaucracy. And they all just said, oh, this is great. Let's publish this immediately for the citizens. Like, they must just be so deeply out of touch. I mean, the only person who I could possibly see following this advice is Dr. Fauci. But of course, like, he'll be in the special government bunker already for all the well-connected political people, so he won't even need to worry about any of it.
I just have other questions. Like, if there's a nuclear bomb, like, are you like, oh, wait, let me get my mask? Like, I have so many questions about who wrote this and who actually sat down and thought this is how people would respond. It makes no sense.
With your money.
And it actually makes me mad because I'm kind of fascinated by disaster relief and responses, and I've done some research into them. This is kind of nerdy, but there's this book called Hidden Brain that I think any central planner and all those people who don't want to be central planners should read. But it talks about like how people actually react in emergencies and in ways that we can actually have systems in place to circumvent some of that. Like if you ever see somebody, for one example, getting beaten up in public and nobody's rushing in to help them. There's actually research that shows if one person steps forward and intervenes, everybody else will. But if nobody does, it's like your brain kind of keeps you in lockstep and nobody intervenes. And so just even knowing that can make people more likely to intervene. So having those kinds of things in place when there's a disaster or something really bad happening are important. And instead, they're spending our money on this kind of thing. I have a former boss who lives in San Francisco, which is like honestly constantly under attack from fires, earthquakes. You just never know what's going to happen in San Francisco. And she's amazing. And she keeps an entire go pack basically ready to go with actual emergency items. She has this intricate plan with her friends and family for getting in communication and meetup points and like what to actually do if an emergency happens. And all I have to say is I want Mona to go run FEMA because this is not it. Like we need some new people in this entity. We need better imagination, better responses, because honestly, I mean, hopefully we don't get to a point of nuclear war. But again, given our idiotic foreign policy, you never know. And Americans do need better preparation if that does happen. This is a joke.
I mean, yeah, I agree that I don't think it's likely, but it's certainly not impossible, especially with the dangerous escalations that some people are proposing. I mean, there's a Republican senator who called on Biden to do a preemptive nuclear strike against Russia. Like, actually. Roger Wicker from I think Kansas or somewhere, but and I can put a link to his comments there. There are some people out here also calling for a no-fly zone in Ukraine from the U.S., which, to explain to folks what that means, it's not like the U.S. has a special force field we can set up that blocks planes. When we set up a no-fly zone somewhere, it means that we are going to shoot down any plane that enters it. If you shoot down Russian planes, I mean, we could quickly spiral into a war that could turn nuclear with nuclear power in Russia. Now, thankfully, and I got to give the Biden administration some credit for how they're handling this. They have very clearly said, no boots on the ground and no-fly zone, because they know that would potentially lead to war with Russia, which is catastrophic. I mean, no matter how you feel about the Ukrainian people, we can have all the compassion in the world for what they're going through, risking, the national security of not just the U.S., but like the fate of humanity from a nuclear conflict over their invasion is simply not on the table. But there are genuinely some crazy warhawk people in this country in positions of power who, if they got their way, nuclear war could happen.
Yeah. And I mean, I honestly feel like the media is gunning for it. Like, I really do feel like the narrative that's being spun is like one where you're meant to feel intense emotion about Ukraine and really trying to stir up the sentiment of like, we need to go in and do something. I see a lot, I've been tagged in this by people who are allegedly anti-war, allegedly libertarians in the past week, where it's like, Hannah, surely you see now that we must go in. I'm like, I absolutely do not see that. Like, under no circumstance do I think that there's an exception. We do not need to intervene in this. But it's easy. This is how people get sucked into the military-industrial complex, because when you see people suffering, when you see people being persecuted, the instinct is to do something, and I understand that. But if you know anything about history and our foreign conflicts, you know that us doing something does not usually result in any positive outcomes. It often makes things far more destabilized. It creates blowback, and at the end of the day, like, we have to be careful with our resources. We're not doing great as a country. We're not doing great with our infrastructure, with our budget, with our education. I mean, on virtually no plane is America like excelling right now. We need to keep our resources here. We need to invest in our own country. We need to protect American lives. And I think that it's very easy to emotionally manipulate people and get them to forget that. But we need to keep elevating that very basic fact. I hate what's happening over there, but I think that is up to Ukraine and their neighbors to figure out and handle. And it's not something we should ever be involved with.
Yeah, and I do think, for example, there are people literally calling for us to do regime change in Russia. And we have to make an important distinction, is that, like, opposing regime change is not the same thing as being pro-regime. I think you agree with me, I think Putin is terrible, right? I think he's done horrible things. Yeah. But at the same time, there is absolutely, one, we can't try to regime change a leader with access to nukes, and two, there's no guarantee that what would come next would be better. We've done all sorts of regime change where then we end up putting terrorists aligned with us in charge, or who are at first aligned with us and then aren't. Like, oftentimes we end up putting our own autocrats or our own, terrible dictators in charge, and then it doesn't end up any better for the people or even better for us sometimes. So the idea, there are people pushing for regime change. I'll put a link in the show notes to a little roundup of these crazies. And I just think that should be totally off the table, no matter how terrible Putin is. We could talk about things that we could do to respond, or diplomatic solutions, economic solutions, maybe, but no, absolutely not to any of this military nonsense.
You bring up something that I think I want to make sure we cover here, and we've done a bit of this on BASEDPolitics at the website, but it's been hard to talk about this because oftentimes when you are anti-war and you're anti-intervention, people will start to say like, oh, well, then you're aligned with the entity that they don't like, right? We saw that all the way back to the Iraq War when people said that about Ron Paul, like, oh, well, you're a terrorist sympathizer then. It's like, no, I just actually know how the world works and don't want to see these casualties. And so I think that you've seen some of that right now with people who are anti-war saying, well, then you're pro-Putin. It's like, absolutely not. I think that's such a played out sort of line of attack of trying to say that anybody who's not in favor of regime change or entering wars is a puppet. That's BS. But then it's also been difficult because there have actually been people who have been kind of pro-Putin on the far right.
I know there are a few people, few crazies who kind of are pro-Putin.
Yeah. I mean, not kind of, like they've been like chanting Putin at stuff. Like it's very creepy and weird. Those people are freaks, and as a whole, like I think it's a small vocal minority, as it usually is with the fringy alt-right. But that being said, like I think it's really hard to talk about some of this and be clear. So I want to over communicate in this episode that Brad and I hate Putin. Think he's disgusting. I think he's a psychopath, and I think that you can think those things without wanting to intervene. And I think you can not want to intervene while not supporting what's happening. So it's a very fine line to toe, and I understand not many people do it. Certainly not many people do it well. Brad and I are really trying hard to make sure we're educated and that we are towing that line. But there's a lot of people who aren't, and it's very easy, I think, to go off the deep end and get sucked into some of these really problematic narratives when we discuss conflicts like this.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that.